I'm JP Tuesday.
And I'm Kiki Cannon. As lifelong Disney fans, the work of countless talented Disney creatives have shaped our lives.
Now, as the Disney catalog expands, we're taking a journey through film and television to discover if that spark that shaped us as children lives on in adulthood.
Does your favorite Disney media still cast that same spell? Join us as we find out. We are Rewatching the Magic.
Hi, Kiki.
Hi, Tuesday.
We are talking about Flight of the Navigator, the Disney movie from 1986. This was one of those movies I grew up on. I watched this movie every chance I could, watching it on the Disney Channel growing up. And as we were talking about doing this movie, Kiki said you had never seen this movie, and I think it was because, as we've discussed in the past, you did not grow up with the Disney Channel.
No, I didn't get Disney Channel until my late teens, maybe into my early 20s.
When it stopped being a premium channel and just been a regular basic cable channel.
Yeah. Where I live is kind of rural, so we were always really behind on getting everything. So yeah, I didn't grow up with the Disney Channel. We could not afford premium channels, and where I lived, it was premium channel up until basically I grew out of the Disney Channel age range. I thought I had seen this before, but when I turned it on and started watching it, I was like, oh, I just remember the trailer from all my Disney VHSs when I was a kid. So I had seen lots of clips of it, but it turns out I had never seen the whole movie.
It's really weird coming back to this because I hadn't seen it in several years. But yeah, this movie kind of it's in that vein of movies of the era of kid and space. Like, not too long before this came the movie Explorers. And of course, all of those kind of movies were chasing E.T.
I mean, this movie even has the joke in there where the guy says he just said he wanted to phone home, you know.
So yeah, they're not really hiding the fact that they're trying to chase the clout from E.T. And while I did see the inspirations from E.T. in this, it really did feel more like an inspiration from Explorers. But again, that movie had just come out not too long before this one, so there would be a chance that these two movies would be in production at the same time. And also, this movie has a lot of historical movie facts attached to it. It was one of the first movies to use CG. It was one of the first movies to use morphing CG. And one of the first movies to use a completely synthesized soundtrack. Alan Silvestri, who we have talked about on the show before, you know, he's done soundtracks for Back to the Future, The Avengers, and a bunch of movies in between. Did this entire movie completely on a synthesizer. And that really does push the 80s vibe of it, at least to me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very 80s movie.
I could see the reasoning for that, to push more of the sci-fi edge to it. But it really is like, this is a movie in the 80s, so you gotta have synth. Like, if you were to make a movie today set in the 80s, it would have a lot of synth music and just the best music videos from MTV history playing on every scene. A reason I really wanted to talk about this movie for so long, this has been on my list for a while, is we really get to talk about Paul Reubens again. It's, it's almost a year since his passing. And while he has done a lot of work with Disney, not a lot of it has been in film. He was the voice of Captain Rex in the original Star Tours. He was doing the scratch vocals for Roger Rabbit before they actually went into full production. In terms of Disney movies starring Paul Reubens, there aren't a lot of them, and this is kind of the best option in terms of that. And he's not even credited as Paul Reubens in this movie. He's credited as Paul Wall.
Paul Mall.
Paul Mall, yeah. Don't know why. It's not like people would know the name Paul Reubens anyway. Everyone at this point already knew him as Pee Wee Herman. And if you didn't know he was Pee Wee Herman, by the halfway point of this movie, they hit you over the head with it.
It was kind of interesting because when I was watching this and Max, his character, started talking, I said to you, I said, this does not sound like Paul Reubens, because, we're both big fans of Paul Reubens and know his voice pretty well. And I said that it just did not sound to me like his voice, and you talked about that maybe they, pitch shifted it or something.
It definitely sounds pitch shifted in some of the scenes, especially when he's talking very seriously.
Yeah. But then there is the scene kind of early on where the kid says something about laughter and says you should try it. And so Max laughs, and it's just the Pee-wee laugh.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is in fact Paul Reubens.
And once Max scans the kid's brain, David here, he gains part of his personality, and he's just Pee Wee Herman for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, if you had not caught on that it was Paul Reubens at that point, or Pee Wee Herman, then that's the point where you absolutely know.
Also, this movie has another bit of Hollywood history. This is the feature film debut for Sarah Jessica Parker. This is her feature film debut. So that's a little bit of trivia there for you.
And it is kind of interesting because she's kind of adorable in this.
Yeah.
I will admit to not being the biggest fan of hers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's a decent enough actress and everything, but I'm not really. Most of the things she's been in are not really my type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And but she's so cute in this. We have to give a major shout out to Captain Disillusion on YouTube, who we're pulling a lot of our information from. He put out a great video on Flight of the Navigator, and especially the special effects. It is very well researched, and we appreciate him greatly because that is where we're getting a lot of our information. We do not have the time to do the sort of research he did, so bless him greatly for that.
Yeah, thanks to that video, it's amazing on how much of this video. While I just said a lot of this was one of the first this was one of the first movies to use CG and morphing CG. A majority of the effects, especially with the spaceship in this movie, were practical effects.
Yeah,
with both full size and miniature models of the ship.
Yeah, this movie is great on the special effects front because it blends early CG, it blends effects that were created in the 1920s, it blends like stop motion animation. It blends matte paintings. It basically every kind of effects that you could think of, they blend it together for this one movie, and it is really incredible. But the one thing I will say that really blew me away, that we learned from the Captain Disillusion documentary that we watched, was that because it was so early in CGI, and because a lot of the programs that we would use now had not been invented yet, and they were having to code everything by hand, it took 20 minutes to render a single frame. And remember that this film would be running 24 frames for 1 second of footage. So that is 8 hours to render a single minute of CGI footage for whenever the ship is CGI. So if you're the type of person that does any kind of, rendering of video for, the internet or YouTube or anything like that, next time you're like, ugh, this is taking forever, just remember 8 hours per minute of render time. And maybe you'll feel a little bit better about it.
Another big thing from this one was the star of the movie himself, David, our main kid, Joey Kramer. Oh, if you ever look up this guy's life, he's had. It's weird because the kid in the movie has a rough life, and the actual actor has a rougher one. He's gone through a lot of issues with substance abuse. He's clean now. He's gone through and conquered his demons, and he's gone out. I would also recommend a documentary called Life After the Navigator, which I believe is on Tubi for free. So you can actually check that out if you're interested in Joey Kramer's life. Not only does it talk about the movie, but it talks about him and his issues after this movie and his struggles to stay as an actor and his substance abuse. I would recommend that as well.
It's really kind of weird because it's like, oh, what happened to the kid from Flight of the Navigator? And then it's like, well, he had problems with drugs, and you're like, oh, that happens to a lot of child stars. I feel for him. I feel for anybody that, has issues with substance abuse. And then it's like, oh, and also he like robbed a bank. And then you're like, oh, okay, like he really had a rough time of it,
Yeah.
But like you said, last we heard, he does seem to be clean and is trying to get back into acting. So we wish him well. I hope that works out for him. But yeah, the interesting thing is that this does have some interesting people in the cast. Veronica Cartwright is the mother. We've talked about her before when we talked about Alien. We've already talked about Paul Reubens. We've also got Howard Hessman, who
Johnny Fever.
Yeah, people may remember as Johnny Fever on WKRP in Cincinnati. That was kind of cool to see him in there. And like you said, this was Sarah Jessica Parker's first film.
As the dad, we have Cliff DeYoung. This was the first movie I saw Cliff DeYoung in, but I know him best as the other guy that played Brad Majors in Shock Treatment.
Yeah, there is that. It is a very interesting cast.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is that apparently there were a couple of kids that auditioned for the role of David. Two of them were Joaquin Phoenix and Chris O'Donnell. They were passed over for the role.
Can you imagine that timeline?
Yeah.
Also, a lot of puppetry in this movie, not just of the character of Max, but the several alien specimens they have on the ship. And the puppetry was done by the same puppetry team that did the year prior did Johnny Five in Short Circuit.
Yeah, that was kind of cool to find out that that's who did that. The thing is that while the puppetry for Max is really, really good, the puppetry for the little aliens isn't quite as good because, as we found out in the Captain Disillusion video, apparently they had to film part of this movie in Norway because a Norwegian company helped produce the film, and that was part of their thing. Was they were like, well, we'll put money into it, but you have to film part of it in Norway. And when the puppeteers got there, they didn't really have time to like vet the puppets, and so they did not really get kind of the quality of puppets that they would have normally worked with. And it seems that when you look at the puppetry for anything other than Max, the puppetry is slightly substandard because they just got on set and had to work with what they were given. And according to Captain Disillusion's video, the original puppets were like really garishly colored and had to be repainted
On set.
on set, like at the last minute. And the only puppet that the actual puppeteers made themselves was the really cool slime puppet with the cold, which is actually the best puppet in the thing other than Max.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see the difference between the ones that the Johnny Five puppeteers actually made themselves, and the ones that they just showed up on set and this Norwegian production company were like, oh, you said you wanted puppets, here's some puppets.
So for reference, anything filmed outdoors was filmed in Florida. Anything indoors was filmed in Norway.
Yeah. The cool thing is that when we were watching the documentary that Captain Disillusion did, and he was talking about how Max was puppeteered, I'm pretty sure that a sort of lower budget version of that is how the current GPC on Mystery Science Theater is done. So I think that this may be the inspiration for how they took GPC on the current Mystery Science Theater series.
Because the current GPC comes down from the ceiling, and the old GPC came up from the floor.
Yeah. So from what I've seen of behind the scenes footage, it seems to be that GPC is kind of a lower budget version of how Captain Disillusion said that Max worked. So I do wonder if this was maybe part of the inspiration for how they set up the puppetry for GPC.
I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. Joel Hodgson is like a puppetry nerd. He usually hosts like big puppetry festivals, so he would know a lot about this stuff.
Yeah. But that's what tweaked in my brain when I was watching that part about the puppetry in that documentary. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, this reminds me a lot of what I've seen about how they do GPC now on Mystery Science Theater. So I don't know for sure, but that's what was in my brain when I was watching that. So if anybody knows for sure, please contact me over social media and tell me if that was in fact the inspiration.
Yeah, so let's kind of get into what the story of this movie is. So we start in the 1970s, July 4th, 1978 to be exact. David and his family, they're enjoying themselves. David's little brother wants to go play with his friends. Yeah, you can tell that this is definitely an 80s movie, 70s style, because they get this right. Kids with no seatbelts and just climbing out of the back of the station wagon. That is so accurate to the time. I don't know about you, Kiki, but I've got the same way here.
Oh, I am from the deep south, so that was the safe way to ride in a car. The way that I would ride around town was get in the back of the pickup truck. I'm not kidding. It was just like, why do you even need to be inside the car? Put 6 kids in the bed of a pickup truck and drive around town. If the thing flips, all 6 kids will be thrown clear of the truck. It'll be fine. Kids bounce, right?
Yeah. At the end of the night, he's told to go pick up his little brother. And he sees something. He falls down.
No. We got to talk about this more, because you're talking about like kids in the back of a station wagon with no seatbelts. No. This is why there was that whole like kid on the milk carton craze when we were little, because like the mom goes, "Hey, your little brother just left his friend's house. Go meet him in the middle of the woods. It's only a half a mile walk." And he's like, "But it's only a half a mile walk. My 8-year-old brother can walk through the woods for a half a mile. It's not a big deal." And I'm like, this is why like half of Gen X and millennials like ended up on a milk carton at some point in their childhood.
But this is also that era, is like, boomer parents, no offense, just let their kids do whatever because they wanted the kids out of the house, because parents wanted alone time. Let's be real about that. So like, okay, kid, go outside, do whatever. Oh, your little brother's out in the woods. Go get your brother. Mom and dad need to be alone.
It's amazing that like any of us survived. I was talking the other day about how phone books no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, we're also worried about doxing now, you know? And I'm like, but they used to just deliver a book of everybody's phone number and address and full name to everybody's house.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's no wonder that like the 70s and early 80s were serial killer central, you know? Like,
And, you know, that commercial that would play on TV, it's 8 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?
and it's like, no, because the street lights aren't on yet. They're not supposed to be home. Do I know where my kids are? No. And also, I don't care.
Yeah.
But yeah, that just made me laugh when she was like, you know, go meet your brother halfway. It's only half a mile. Like, through the woods. And I'm like, I used to just get dropped off at my aunt's pool by myself as a kid, and then just that's where I'd be all day.
Hmm.
And then like hours later, an adult would come by to pick me up, and I'd have just been in the pool by myself all day with like nobody watching me, like nobody home, nobody watching me, just a kid in a pool by myself for like hours. And I'm like, how did I not drown to death?
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, I was like, that's the thing that got me about this movie is I was like, no wonder the kid was kidnapped by aliens. That was probably the best possible scenario at this point.
Yeah. I mean, that's the next part of the plot point here. He falls into a ravine and he wakes up and it's 8 years later. Turns out he was abducted by aliens because they were passing through Earth and needed a human specimen. That's the entire point of all of these aliens on the ship later in the movie, is that they are all specimens from different planets that this alien creature or this alien. We never see the aliens. We just see the computer Max. That's the entire point. They are taken from their world, they are studied, and they are put back on their planet. Not only do these aliens know hyperspace travel, they apparently also know time travel. Pick them up and then drop them back off at the moment that they left with no memory of what happened.
But for some reason, as we find out later on in the movie, Max, the computer robot thingy, says that for some reason a human can't go back in time without possibly vaporizing. We don't know why this is. It's just the movie needs to happen.
Yeah, the movie needs to happen, so we just can't automatically put the kid back in the 1978. We need to have a movie where he's in 1986. And that's what happened. He gets dropped off. It's now 1986. He hasn't aged a day. He tries to go back to his home, but the new families lives there. He gets taken in by the cops. And NASA gets involved because there's been sightings of an alien spaceship, and all of a sudden this kid shows up that might have a connection to this alien spaceship. I gotta say, the acting on this kid is amazing as he sees his mother and father and now older brother, which was his younger brother, now 8 years older. His father, who is now gray-haired. His mother, which has wrinkles in her face. His younger brother that's now twice his size. It's good acting from Joey Kramer here. Like, the look of shock, the look, like he just wants to go home, but now everything's different. Everyone's older. What happened? He just wants to go home. What's going on?
That I will admit that the moment when he goes, he wakes up in the ravine and then he runs back to his house and there's like an old couple living in his house. And like, he runs into his bedroom and it's now like a library with an old dude listening to records, And you feel so bad for him because he just collapses on the stairs and he's like, "Where's my family? What happened?"
And the cops question him, and he says, it's 1978. The president's Jimmy Carter. And when he's finally, there's that point where he's in the hospital, and he finally, early in the movie they have the brother rivalry. They call each other names, and they do it again when he's in the hospital. But it's a more loving way, and then he says, "I'm scared," and you believe this kid is scared because he has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, you really do feel for the kid in that early those early scenes when he's trying to figure out what's going on. And the thing is that you find out that he should be like 20 years old,
Yeah. He was 12 in 78. Is 86. Yeah, he should be 20-something years old. But he's still 12 years old. He has no idea what's going on. Meanwhile, as all of this is happening, NASA discovers a crashed alien spaceship that collided into some power lines, and they're bringing it into their facility. And they get the kid, and they kind of, it's weird how they set it up, because like, oh, we're going to monitor you for 48 hours to see what's going on. And then like immediately, oh no, we need to keep this kid longer. This kid isn't going home. They're going to experiment on him and scan his brain.
Well, the thing is I think in the beginning they might be honest, and then they question him and they discover that his brain is full of computer code, and it's
Star charts.
Yeah, it's talking to the computer in
They put
weird languages and stuff, and
yeah, they put a thing on his brain, and whatever question they ask, his brain is automatically answering into the computer. And we find out that the alien spaceship, is from a planet called Phalon. We never see who the Phalon are. We never see them at all. I don't know if that would have been necessary in the movie, but that's it. The ship was going from Earth to Phalon and back again. And that it takes, 2.2 light years to go from Phalon to Earth and back again. And because they're using light speed travel, we kind of talked about this when we talked about Planet of the Apes, kind of going into that scientific theory of it, that it bends time. You're bending time around yourself to go to light speed. Therefore, the universe ages and you don't.
yeah, the thing about it is that if I have a complaint with the early part of the movie is that, it's called Flight of the Navigator and stuff, and I feel like there's a little too much setup before we get to the Flight of the Navigator.
Yeah, we don't get to the Navigator part until like halfway through the movie. Because there are those little moments where, again, it's kind of E.T. in a way, where the kid is answering someone that's calling him, but he doesn't know who's calling him. No one else can hear it, but he can hear it. Very similar to Elliot and E.T. having their little mind meld towards the end of that movie.
Well, the thing about E.T. though is that, you know, E.T. the alien's kind of there from the start,
Yeah.
and you're already dealing with the consequences of this thing having landed and being around this kid and stuff, you know? So the problem is, though, is that with Flight of the Navigator, there's too much of setup with the kid is very sad about his family. The kid is stuck in the room. The kid makes friends with Sarah Jessica Parker. The kid, you know,
Mm.
and you're like, okay, we know at some point he's going to get on a spaceship. Can we get to the part where he gets on the spaceship?
And they tease the spaceship pretty much from the beginning of the movie, because at the start of the movie, you see a flying saucer. Oh, it's a frisbee. And you think you see this big round thing in the sky. Oh, it's a water tower. So they tease you with the spaceship up until the point where NASA gets the spaceship. And then there's that time of David hearing voices seemingly from the spaceship urging him to come to it. So we really don't get the climax, the point of that until like halfway through the movie, which is about an hour into the movie, 45 minutes. And I do like the design of the ship in the movie. Kind of reminds me of a clamshell. And again, it's real. They actually made a two full-size models of this spaceship. One with the hatch closed and one with the hatch open. Ironically, both of those full-size ships were on display in the old studio tour of the original Disney MGM studios back in the day. So if you were able to go to the Disney MGM studios and do the studio tour in like the 80s and 90s and very early 2000s, you would have seen both full-size models of Flight of the Navigator's spaceship. But yeah, let's just get to where he finally makes the escape from NASA and finally gets to the ship where he meets Max. So what we find out is that, as I said, the ship crashed into some power lines and all of the star charts were erased from the ship's memory. But what they did do is put all of the star charts into David's head, because this movie does push on the myth of humans only using 10% of their brain. So the computer decided, well, why don't we fill that 90% with something else? And it turned out to be the star charts from the ship's memory bank. So now the ship needs David to be its navigator, because all the star charts are in his head, to get out of there, just to get it back home. And I agree with you. I wish they had gotten to this much earlier in the movie. I would say about 15, 20 minutes earlier than they do in the movie, because it does go really slow up to that point. But once we're at that point, the movie really starts to take off, quite literally and figuratively.
Yeah, the thing is that the movie becomes more interesting, and I'm not saying there's not interesting parts before that, because the kid is very compelling.
Hmm.
And you do feel for him, and you know, there's some good acting and stuff. But the movie picks up when he actually gets in the ship and starts communicating with Max, and the rapport between them is really good. I like that. It becomes like a buddy cop kind of movie at that point, you know? And it becomes more interesting to me. I don't know how you feel about it watching it back as an adult.
As an adult, I will say I think my viewing habits have changed since being a child because yeah, I would have wanted this part of the movie to come at an earlier point. But okay, we're 45, 50 minutes into this hour and a half movie. And I wish that this had happened 15, 20 minutes earlier.
Because I really do think that the strength of the film is that relationship between Max and David.
Mhm.
I don't know how you feel about that.
Same. I mean, again, it's really that's the crux of the movie. That's the relation. That's really what makes this movie tick. It's that camaraderie between the two. First, it's sort of confrontational in a way because Max just wants to return to Phelan and he can't return to Phelan without the star charts. The star charts are in David's head. David doesn't want to go to Phelan. He wants to go home. These two have two different goals. Things start to get fun, and I'll say this right now. Things start to get fun once the brain scan happens. When Max scans David's brain to get the star charts that he put in out, and then he just gets a personality. On the plus, again, it's a more fun movie at this point, but yeah, it's just Paul Reubens doing the Pee Wee Herman voice.
But I mean, there's a reason why a bunch of people liked Pee-wee,
Yeah. Because
So
Pee-wee's Big Adventure had just come out, so why not?
the thing is that Max kind of takes over that little brother role that David lost when he came back and his little brother is now older than him. And especially once the kind of personality transfer happens.
Because they also do the name calling that he did with his little brother.
Yeah. So that to me is what makes this kind of fun. In that way, because they're kind of on par at this point, because Max is younger in that sense, because he's just now gotten that personality.
Emotions for the first time.
So I like that dynamic, And it does become fun at that point, despite the fact that I did like the emotional core of the earlier part of the film, where David is trying to figure out, like, how do I deal with this being thrust into the future, kind of thing. It's an interesting idea, but they have an issue with it dragging on a little too much. The thing is like I said, Sarah Jessica Parker is cute in this movie, and she's very nice in her attempts to help David. And Captain Disillusion brings up something in his documentary that I found very interesting, which was he got his hands on an earlier shooting script, and it seems there may have been an earlier draft of the script where, spoiler alert, when David ends up back in 1978 at the end of the movie, he ends up meeting younger Sarah Jessica Parker, and you realize, like, oh yeah, if he had just kept aging, they would have been the same age when they met in 1986.
So yeah, there's a plot. There's a thing that happens earlier in the movie, and Captain Disillusion did mention it, that David kind of has a crush on a girl, and he's too scared to talk to her. And his dad is trying to, give him a little bit of confidence boost. Just go over there and talk to her. What's the worst that could happen? And that never gets resolved in the movie at all. He has a crush on a girl. She's hanging out with another boy. He's kind of spying on them through his telescope. But that goes nowhere. And as you said, in that original or earlier draft script, there was that he would actually start talking to a girl. And we find out that girl is Sarah Jessica Parker's character as a 12-year-old girl. Well, she did say he was cute, so I think that's what he's rolling with.
Well, and the thing is that I think the idea is that he would be more comfortable around her because he kind of already knows her, but just from the future.
Mm.
I mean, make of that what you will, but
Time
yeah.
paradox.
Yeah.
So it makes sense if they had. I don't know if that would have made the movie better or not, but it would have given some resolution to his little fear of talking to girls.
And it would have given her story some resolution, which I think would have been interesting. Mm-hmm. Because in the way that the movie as it stands goes, the last we see of her is that the NASA guy, they're trying to track down David after he escapes with the spaceship, and they track her down at his parents' house because before he escapes, he says, "Go to my parents' house and tell them that I'm okay and what happened to me." And she does, and they track her down there. Mm. And they say, go back to NASA and wait for us there. And that's just the last we see of her.
Yeah.
And there's never any resolution for her story. And it would have been nice to see some kind of resolution. Like, even if it's just like they meet up in 1978 and just become friends.
Didn't have to be a relationship, just them being friends would have been fine. So, right in the third act of this movie, this becomes a road trip movie because after the personality transfer, Max says, "Oh, I'll get you home," and they end up in Tokyo, which is very bad green screen.
Yeah, I was going to say, that is the worst special effect in this entire film.
Like, they just got a couple of Asian actors local to Florida, filmed them on like a green screen, blue screen set, and then just put a picture of Tokyo. Oh, we're in Tokyo now. So now they have to fly the ship from Tokyo to San Francisco, across the U.S., back to Florida. And again, that's really there to extend the movie. Like, if a lot of this movie happens because the movie needs to happen. When they finally make it back to Florida, we see probably one of the you kind of mentioned it earlier. They go to Al's Gator Farm, and it's just a bunch of kids nonchalantly saying, "Can we look at the spaceship?" Because David lands the spaceship so he can make a call to his family to let them know that he's coming home. And then there's this family that pulls up, and the kids want to get on the spaceship, and Al, we assume Al, is just dumbfounded that he just had a spaceship land in the front of his business. Like, he has one line in this entire movie. He is dumbfounded seeing this spaceship land. And like you said, it's just him saying he just wanted to phone home. Our ET reference.
The thing is that this is the most Florida segment in the entire film. It is so funny because starting at Al's Gator Farm, this becomes the most Florida chunk of the movie. Because, first of all, Al's Gator Farm.
Alligator.
Well, I mean, I wasn't even talking about that. I'm just talking about, like...
It's a gator farm in Florida.
Yeah, and, I mean, I've been there. What's really hilarious is there is a state park about a 45-minute to an hour drive from my house where you can just drive there and walk through it, and there's just gators there, and there's like no fencing and nothing to separate you from the gators. And the only thing there to keep you quote unquote safe from the gators is a sign that just has like a picture of like a gator and a cheeseburger and the little like circle with the line through it, no sign. Like, don't feed gators cheeseburgers kind of idea. And like, that's the thing. That's like the entire thing to keep people safe. It's just like, hey, maybe it's a dumb idea to try to throw McDonald's at the gators.
Yeah.
And that's like a government-run state park right next to my house. like that's a place where people take their kids. Like, I'm sure Al's Gator Farm or whatever this place is called is like has more, like there's a joke where the dad of the family that shows up is like, these places don't have insurance, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure Al's Gator Farm in this movie is more safely run than the state park next to my house with the don't feed cheeseburgers to gators sign.
But after that, he calls home and his brother picks it up and he says, hey, I'm coming home. I don't know where the house is. I don't know how to get to the new house yet. So could you put a light on or something so I know where the new house is? And he says, if I have to burn the house down, I'll make sure you find it, which again, probably the most Florida thing anyone has said in this movie.
Yeah, and I immediately, when I saw that, I was like, well, that's Florida for you. Like, oh, you need to know where we're at? Don't worry. We're going to set something on fire so you can find us.
And he just conveniently has a box of fireworks.
Well, the thing is that they're the sparklers. It's not, this is the one thing in the movie that actually makes sense. They are the leftover 4th of July sparklers and stuff that they were going to shoot off in the boat, because we see them do it at the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the box that's in David's room. They had just brought all of David's stuff out of storage, and they're setting up his room for when he comes home. And his brother goes into his room and grabs all of the fireworks that were left over from the 4th of July when he disappeared. It's weirdly the only thing in the movie that actually makes perfect sense. Because when it gets to the end of the movie, they have all these sparklers and flares and stuff because that's what the family was going to do as soon as the little brother got home, was they were going to go out on that boat and shoot off fireworks. And when the kid disappeared, they put all of the stuff in storage, and so they still had all these fireworks. Strangely, that is the one thing in the movie that I was like, that is weirdly well thought out.
I'm surprised that 8-year-old fireworks would still work that way.
I mean, gunpowder will last a pretty decent time as long as you keep it dry. So I don't know where they were storing his stuff, but as long as it didn't get too bad in the humidity.
So yeah, he sets off the fireworks, and that's enough to get him. That gives him the signal to know where the house is at. But problem is, as soon as they get back to the house, here come the feds. Here comes NASA.
I mean, honestly, they should have seen that coming.
Yeah. He's a kid, though. He wouldn't think that way. He thinks as long as I'm home, I'm safe. And he starts to make that connection as soon as he's reaching home. Is like all his friends are now 20 and he's 12. So everyone he knows is older than him now. And Max keeps telling him, I'd like to take you back, but you won't survive the trip. But when he sees that, here's all these feds, here's NASA circling his family's house, what option does he have? If he lands, gets off that ship, he's going to be a science experiment for the rest of his life. So damned if you do, damned if you don't.
It would have been really sad to have been in that timeline, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that his brain no longer has the information that NASA wanted. So I think NASA would have gotten bored with him really quickly, which is the thing he didn't think of.
Or they could have just killed him.
Well, I mean, yeah, but...
I mean, it's still the government. And
but they would have had to kill the entire family.
Like
I mean, I'm not saying they wouldn't, but...
I'm just saying, it's easy to miss. There's a line that Max says that David would retain all the information stored in his brain after the transfer. So it's not like an extraction, it's more like a copy.
See, I did miss that. I thought he extracted the information completely.
He just copied it. So those star charts and all the information on Phelan would still be in his brain. So this is really the safest option. Again, either be a science experiment for NASA or risk vaporization by time travel. I must say that the time travel scene is really good. Like how the effects on this time travel scene, the thunder and the clouds and the way the ship is done, it's really cool. And the flashing back to Max with the lights in his face, and I don't know, I really enjoyed that time travel scene.
Yeah, I thought it was really well done as well.
So yeah, he wakes up. He's back home and he survived the trip. It's 1978 again. He goes home. His family's in the boat, like you said, and they're setting off those fireworks that they were going to do. The only thing that turns out, David has a little passenger with him, as he's been playing with this one little alien guy for the majority of the movie. As Max says, he can't take this little alien home because his planet was destroyed by a comet. I don't think having an alien on Earth, even in the 1970s, would have been a good idea. He probably should have left him on the ship.
Well, the thing is he didn't realize it. I think the alien stowed away. I think that was the idea.
And it's a great moment where he kind of drops the tough boy Exterior, he tells his family that he loves him, much to the shock of his own little brother. Like, where did this come from?
Yeah, the mom is, like, really shocked, like, "Ooh, okay, I'll
But
take it."
yeah. And we end the movie with the ship kind of flying over David's house and Max saying, "See you later, Navigator."
And we get the Pee-wee laugh, just in
Yep.
case you hadn't picked up on the fact that this was Paul Reubens yet.
And that's Flight of the Navigator. I thought the movie was. I mean, is this a great sci-fi classic? I wouldn't say so. I mean, it definitely deserves its cult classic status as it is right now. I enjoyed watching it. Definitely not as much as I did when I was a kid, but I'm not. As you said, it does. As an adult watching this movie, it does take a lot to get this movie into its groove. Like I said, almost an hour into this movie, but once it's in its groove, it's a really fun ride.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at on that. I mean, like I said, this was my first time watching it, so I don't have that nostalgia hit like you do.
Hmm.
But I can see why this was hit with the the kids, you know.
Hmm.
I think if I'd have watched this as a kid, I would have a soft spot in my heart for it. But once it hits that, we're on the ship and we're doing things,
Hmm.
it's fairly fun. And there are some emotional parts that I really do like in the beginning. I just would have liked it to have been a little bit more streamlined
Hmm.
and maybe a little bit more time on the ship.
It's a 90-minute movie, and I feel that you could have cut at least 20 to 30 minutes out of this movie. If you had streamlined it to where he gets to the ship earlier and had more stuff on the ship, this would have been a more fun movie, especially for watching it in modern day 2024. I don't know what else you could have done. Maybe if you had introduced the Phalons as a species on the ship, maybe where the ship is going to Phalon and then you see what those aliens look like or what their plan was. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it seems like they're kind of just scientists or explorers, maybe.
I mean, that's their entire thing is we're going to go from world to world, take one subject from that world, analyze it, and put it back. Like they were not capturing them for experimentation or for a zoo, for lack of a better term. It's just we're going to take this one subject, what makes it tick, and we're going to put it back exactly where we found it because we can do time travel.
Yeah.
So I don't think they had a malicious intention. It's just that according to whatever their readings were, what they saw that humans couldn't survive time travel, which at the end of the movie we find out they can. So there was talk of a remake of this movie and around 2019-ish. As of 2024, there's been nothing about the movie happening. Maybe it's still, I mean, it's in developmental hell right now. Should this movie be remade? I don't know. I do know that if it was, it probably would not have used, it would not use a lot of the practical effects that this movie did use. Probably a lot more CG because we have that technology now.
Okay, so special effects aside, what do you think the movie should be about? Because the last version of it that I've heard about was Bryce Dallas Howard directing, which I'm not against. She's a good director. And it was supposed to be a girl as the Navigator.
I can see that. But, it now falls into the same, the usual suspects are going to complain about it. Let him, I don't care. I don't mind it being a girl as the Navigator if they can have a good story and not just retread all of the points of this original movie. Something a little bit new.
Would you want to do the time travel thing again?
I don't know. I think it could work. Maybe a little bit longer than 8 years. 80s to 2024 is a bit of a jump. 90s to 2024, I think would be a better idea, but I think that's still too big of a gap. And I mean, 2000s nostalgia might work. I don't know. I feel like doing it in a longer period than just 8 years would be what I would do if it was using the time travel aspect again.
The thing is that I think there's so much you'd have to change because, like he said, this movie is based on the myth of like, oh, humans only use 10% of their brain and whatever. So, like, I'm not sure anybody would really want to, that's so very debunked right now that if it was like, oh, we filled up the rest of your brain with, this because you weren't using it, I think people would be like, oh, that's kind of silly,
Mm-hmm.
Because the last movie I know of that used that got mocked for it, like, really horribly. I don't know.
I think you don't need to use that. I think that if it was a situation of the ship needs a living body to be its navigator in general, like you can erase the where you're storing the star charts in your brain kind of thing. It just needs a living body, and you can kind of work with that. Maybe the crash just kills the pilot, and the last living being that was on the ship was the kid, so it needs the kid to fly it. Maybe.
That's not a bad idea.
Like, we just see a Phaelon or whatever species they want to go with, and it's, Area 51, go with that myth. Go with that. And these kids just live in Arizona or something. And that's where it is. And the kid has to go to Area 51 to get the ship and all of that. And, oh, you've taken me from my home and I'll be your navigator, but you got to take me back home. Or something.
Yeah, I mean, I would be down with something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that it would need kind of a different version of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot of ways you could do it, and I wouldn't mind it being remade with a different kind of take on it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We'll see what happens.
So let's get to the question, Kiki. Does Flight of the Navigator have the magic?
I think the back half of it does, but I think the front half drags on a little too long, like we said.
I'm going to agree with you on that. I think it takes way too long to get to the Navigator part of Flight of the Navigator. But I still had fun coming back to this movie after so long and watching it. I'm going to say it does have magic. It's just a really slow start. So if you're one of those kind of people who does not like a slow start movie, this is going to be a slog. if you can appreciate the slow build up to the ship and Max and actually getting into the actual Navigator part, you're going to have a good time. But once it does get to that part, once it does get to the actual Navigator part of Flight of the Navigator, it really picks up. It's a fun ride. Definitely worth a watch. So I will say Magic.
Yeah. With those caveats, I will agree.
Mm-hmm. On that, let's get to next week. It is time, Kiki. It is time we have done every movie of the quote Xerox era of Disney except one. And it's time to finally close the chapter on that era of Disney. Next week, The Fox and the Hound.
We are closing the book on a very specific era in Disney history.
Yep. We're going to see if they're the best of friends or not. So come back next week for The Fox and the Hound, and we will talk to you all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Don't let the magic stop here. Join our conversations on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Rewatching the Magic. We are on the X, formerly known as Twitter, at Rewatch the Magic. And new episodes are available every week at rewatchingthemagic.podbean.com. Remember, the magic is for everyone. It only stops if you let it. Podcasts are fun,
but there's work to be done.
We encourage you to get involved. Here are some organizations we support.
The American Civil Liberties Union fights for the constitutional rights of all Americans. Find them at aclu.org.
The National Network of Abortion Funds helps people find access to safe abortion services. Their site is abortionfunds.org.
The Trevor Project provides a 24/7 crisis helpline for LGBTQ youth and education services for schools on LGBTQ issues. They can be found at thetrevorproject.org.
Or find a way to help in your area.